Hey, folks, welcome to the pre-show. It is 9 o'clock and 49 seconds by my clock in central United States. And so we go live over on the radio station at Odyssey Radio at 3 minutes after the top of the hour. So until then, we're just making sure we're all set up and that our soundboard is not been tampered with. There we go. I think we're doing fine. And just want to make sure we are broadcasting through the appropriate audio settings, blah, blah, blah. There we go. Yep, we're all set to go. And we've got to get our audio hijack going for the radio stream. Let's see. Where's my windows? Why am I missing my window? The window to the left. Home sessions. Recording schedule, audio hijack. It'll come on any second. So, how's everybody doing tonight? We're going to be picking up with our King David series. And also, there will be no Captain's Cabin this evening. We will be done tonight when the radio show ends. I made a commitment to go on someone else's show as a guest tonight. And it's at 10 o'clock. And so I go right over there. It is Ghost Box Radio. And they want to talk with me about some of my books. So that'll be fun. And I am missing, let's see, recordings, sessions, Intrepid radio program. There it is. Boom, bam, boom. And we're ready to roll. And we've got, about 20 seconds left. And we go live over on the radio station. So I'm going to go dark. And everybody sit tight. We'll be back in a few seconds.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey, folks, Scotty Roberts here. Welcome to the program, my program, the Intrepid radio program right here on Odyssey Radio Network. You can go over and hear the audio version on the radio station at odysyradio.com. If you're already there, you can slip over on the side over to the YouTube channel and join the chat room and also watch the video simulcast of this show if you so choose. And that's over at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. So come on over, join everybody else that's over there. Not very many yet. They're getting here. And there's a whole hell of a lot more of you out there than are showing up over in the chat room. So come on over, show your face, say hello to everybody. We'll have a good time. Dead End Collective, Niall from Ireland. Good to see you over there tonight. In the chat room, Randall Flagg, good to see you. My butt's been whipped. Good to see you as well. He said, I am so often into Patriot stuff, driving or sleeping. Bless ya, my Ola brother. Well, thank you, and bless you too, brother. That is an old friend of this show, so you may recognize him. So thanks for being here, everybody. And those of you who are filtering in, come on in and say hi. We're going to continue our little series on David tonight, King David of the Bible, to be exact. And there's a reason that this series, I think, is exciting. Now, something I've noticed, there's been a little bit less listenership to this. Is it because we did this series a couple of years ago? Well, it was 5 years ago. We talked about this. Now, I've got new information I've been bringing in. And is this a topic that perhaps some of you don't want to hear because of its controversial nature or because it's a biblical topic? And we're getting each year, I think, further and further away from people wanting to do things or learn things about the Bible or about the characters of the Bible or the historicity of the Bible or the lack of historicity of the Bible, whatever it might be. So I see this series as valuable, especially if you are Judeo-Christian, because it makes us question the things that have been traditions for us, things that we have held on to for years and years and years, and centuries and millennia with the story of King David. And so I think that this kind of series, this kind of talk on this kind of topic, puts us in a frame of mind where we have to start thinking about what we say we believe. And many times, a lot of us come full circle. We come right back around to where we started. It's a thing of faith. This is where I'm going to be. This is what I'm going to believe. And for some of us, we've already been asking the questions, like me. I ask these questions. Last time we were here, we covered the two main topics about David in the Bible story that everybody really thinks about. And that is David, the author of the Psalms, and David, the slayer of the giant. And we found out that neither of those traditional claims about David have solid historical foundations on which to base them. The one that we're most familiar with, which is, of course, David and Goliath, that story, we find that in a couple of different places in the Old Testament, other than the two books of Samuel, which give us the story of David, the books of Kings and the books of Chronicles, 4 books there, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, they mention David and his acts, but from a different point of view, little different vantage point. And they do talk about how Elhanan the Bethlehemite was the man who slew Goliath. Now, if you look in your English Bible at that verse in Chronicles, the word the brother of Goliath, brother of, is in italics, which means that those words aren't in the text so far as we know. They've been added for clarity. While this is the brother of Goliath, obviously, because David slew Goliath. But that's not what the passage says. It says that Elhanan, the Bethlehemite, slew Goliath, or Goliath of Gath, whose spear was like a weaver's rod. And that's the same description given when David slew him. Dead End Collective, if you want to share that, if you think it's pertinent, he says, I have an opinion on why your listeners are not listening to this. Give me an idea. What's your thinking on it, Niall? That's Niall over in Ireland, for those of you who are wondering who Dead End Collective is, if you don't recognize his name. He's made himself pretty well known in here. I'm not giving away his secret identity or anything. So, you can go ahead. Why do people, do you think, not want to listen to this type of topic on King David? My take is that, it's a Bible story, and I don't really want to have one of two things. I don't want to have what I've chosen to believe challenged. I don't want to, it's not juicy enough. It really isn't juicy enough. And, I will say on that, Niall, if the only reason I draw my regular listeners is because I'm juicy and one day I'm not juicy, so they'll go somewhere else, I say to you guys, why don't you go and stay somewhere else? So if I'm not juicy enough for you, go where it's juicy, because I put an awful lot of time and effort into presenting topics on this show. And if you don't like them, you don't have to listen. Certainly, nobody's making you listen. But if all our loyal listeners do is stick around when there's a topic that they find juicy, and then go somewhere else when it's not, I want to look at you and go, what am I, chopped liver? So we've been doing this for 22, 23 years. Well, 24 years now. Been doing radio. I've been doing this show on this station for over 4 years. I think it'll be 5 years this summer, or will it be 4 years this summer? I don't know. Now, don't take any of what I'm saying as any kind of chastisement or any kind of weird belly aching from behind the mic. That's just me. This is my show. This is what I do. And so I have to govern what I do by what people are listening to. But when you study something and research something and find out, oh, that just wasn't everybody's cup of tea, well, I'm sorry. I enjoyed it. And if you enjoy me and you enjoy the show and you enjoy the conversation here, you're welcome to it. If you don't, there's plenty of other podcasts that rose up during COVID that you can go find and listen to. Cheers. Let me take a drink. Oh, I know what you mean, Niall. I didn't take that as an attack. It's a reason for passive a drop off on certain topics. I'm not really offended by that, Niall. Don't get me wrong. That doesn't offend me at all. I look at that and I go, it's like when you have people who have been loyal listeners for years and years, and you put up something and say, look, we're trying to make this thing be something better. Go over to this site and drop in $4 and help support this radio station or this radio site page. And some people are, well, I don't give money online. It's like, well, excuse me, you're here every night. If getting 30 shows a month on average is not worth $4, then go spend it on something else, a cup of coffee. That's like I always said, supporting this show doesn't cost much more than a cup of coffee. You only have to do it once a month. And so if that sounds like I'm belly aching, don't take it that way. Maybe I'm just spewing, I'm pishing in the wind because, it's like we used to say when I was in church work. There was a variation of that in church work that we would say, well, why is it that people aren't coming on Sunday? Or why is it people come on Sunday, they get all motivated to do what is, I don't want to say what is right, but they do what they're motivated to live their Christian life, let's say. Yet by Monday morning, that's gone. It's out the window because they're not in that place, that Sunday morning place where there's the songs of worship and there's the reminders of who we are and what we have with God and so on. And it was always a little discouraging. It was a bit discouraging to me to find that people, they put on their Sunday morning clothes and their Sunday morning faces, and they salve each other with their Sunday morning salves. But by the time the football game comes on Sunday afternoon or work comes on Monday morning, church is a million miles away. Or if you're Jewish, synagogue from Saturday. So all of those things, blah, 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 you get it. And so, no, if people don't want to listen to a series on King David because it's not juicy enough, and no, Niall, I am not offended by that by any means. It clicks a little button in me that says, look, let me talk about that. I try to present materials and I put a lot of time into putting materials up. But if somebody if the personal side of it is, oh, Scotty's talking about something I don't like today, click, I'll go over and listen to this other guy. Well, thanks. So, I think it's misplaced frustration, says Niall. I understand. But what most of us enjoy on your channel tend not to be extended historical biblical treatises. Very true. And I'm not trying to give a treatise even on King David, but I am trying to look at some what I find very interesting light that's shed on things that we've traditionally believed. And if this is something that's not everybody's cup of tea, which I see by the numbers, since we started doing this series, I'll probably back off of this series. I'll look at this. As a matter of fact, I was thinking that the other night. I did a completely different show on Monday, and I thought, and by the way, for those of you who are new listeners, or not used to what goes on here normally, this is just a little shop talk with my normal listeners and my regular listeners. And so it's me blowing a little bit of steam about this, pishing in the wind about that. So Niall says, simply the way it is. You, after all, notices drop off yourself. I did. And I did. We've done 4 shows on David now, I think, over the last 10 days. And this will be the 5th one, if I got my count right. And I look at the numbers, just the live numbers in the chat room, and I say, oh, obviously not a topic that anybody's really all that interested in. We can get a couple of us interested in it. You can look at the numbers. You go over on my you go over to my channel. You take a look at the numbers for these shows, and it gives you an idea. You know, what did we have? Let's see. King David, 48 views on Friday. King David before that, 73 views. Now, there are 2 shows missing. I obviously didn't click the button to have them go up into my archive so you can see them and access them. But I noticed 5 years ago, when I look back at my archives, we had some of these episodes when we were talking about King David, 400 and 500 views. And so views is a great way for somebody like me who runs a radio show to determine what we're going to talk about, how we're going to gear the show in the future. Sarah says, no matter the numbers, you should do what makes you happy. Yeah. And it makes me happy to talk about this stuff. That's why I talk about it. There is a point, though, also where you say, the things that I do for the radio show, as long as we don't have a way to fund this radio show any better than it is, and we've only got a handful of people that have done anything to help fund the show, that just tells me that the bulk of our listeners aren't really concerned about seeing us go any further, do anything any deeper, do anything. Now, if I suddenly came up with my own money and did amazing things and travel and stuff like that, everybody'd be on board to watch it. But that's the frustration from my end of things as somebody who is the creator of the content. Now, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not as good as I used to be. Maybe I'm not as Niall said, maybe the juice isn't there anymore. So, well, thank you, Niall. He said, Jesus, Scotty, I love your shows no matter the topic. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. I love doing them. And thank you, Sarah. I love doing the shows. I do. And I keep up with it because it's something I enjoy doing. And if I've got an audience of 8, you know what? The show goes on and we still do it. So Field Guy says, go to the grocery store, film it, watch the views roll in. Yeah, I could do that. So, yeah, I could do that for a YouTube channel for my show. We've got a paranormal investigation coming up that Rainey and I are going to do. We're going to put it on film. And if it's not live during the show, we might try to arrange it so we're in the middle of that hunt or starting it at the time that the show comes on. Then we'll do other videos as well and put them up. Tonight, by the way, there will be no Captain's Cabin tonight because I committed to several time slots that were open. This was the best one. Greg Buchan's Ghost Box Radio. He's got me coming on tonight to talk about. He wanted primarily to talk about the rise and not the Nephilim, about the reptilians, secret history of the reptilians, which I will admit to you, and I'll admit on his show, not my favorite book out of the books I've written. It's not my topic. It was a topic that my publisher liked at the time. We're talking Nephilim came out in 2012. And he said, what's going to be your next book for us? And I was just happy that he asked me over at New Page Books. And we went through some topics. He says, how about something on the reptilians? And that's what it ended up being the next year, 2013. And the book started off, as some of you have heard, I've read through the book on this channel 5-6 years ago. And chapter by chapter, gave some commentary on it as I went. And that book started out as an expose on the reptilian mythos that's out there. What about the reptilians? And it ended up being maybe a third into the book my whole emphasis changed. I got into the history of the reptilians as it came from the Anunnaki culture. And then it more became a book that was a psychological exploration into why we need to believe in certain things. And I did not degrade anybody who believes in reptilians, but it became a book about why we have the need to believe these things. Did they really happen? Or is the allure of the unknown, the mystical part of it, element of it, is that something that keeps us interested in that kind of a topic? So link it on YouTube and I'll hop in. I'll do that. I can probably give you a link to it right now. Well, I think the link that I have for tonight's show, and I am going to do the little show on David here tonight. We're going to talk about that a bit, but I believe there is a link, and this just might take you into the show itself as like a caller or something, but I want to see where this broadcasts. It's going to be, hold on, I got to put on my glasses. Which pair? These pair. I got 5 pair of glasses laying around here. Some of them are just reading glasses for drawing up close. A link to the FB event that you can share with your followers. Oh, okay. Let's see what this is. Boom. I'm going to hit that. Here's the link to the event. Copy. It's going to be an event over in Facebook events. And let me throw it in here in our chat room. And you can take a look at it. That did not paste. Let me try again. Paste. There it is. Boom. That, I believe, is the link to the event for the show tonight. I hate Facebook chats, but I'll be there. Me too, field guy. I don't like Facebook chats because, by the way, if anybody is here watching the show and you're chatting with us via Facebook, it does not show up in the YouTube chat room. Nobody can see you. And I'm the only one that can see you, and you can't see anybody else who's chatting over in YouTube, which is the big chat room. So sometimes I take my glasses off and can't read chat, says Randall Flagg. Listening mode. Eyes need a break sometimes. Man, I hear you. And I go back this Friday on my eyes for my final follow-up and hopefully get my my new glasses ordered this Friday. Because this is driving me nuts. And, maybe the whole thing, Niall, while you're still there and everybody listening, if you caught some of my belly aching about the topic of the show and lack of people interested in it and so on and so forth, that's just me belly aching. It's what I do on this show. Sometimes I give you the highs. Sometimes I give you the lows. Sometimes you see me exuberant. Sometimes you see me pissed off. Sometimes you see me... I don't know. Maybe that's thinking too highly of myself, but I think I've got a lot of loyal listeners. I've got a lot of people that listen. We doubled our listenership in 2 months on the YouTube channel, which surprised me. And I didn't have like 12 and went up to 24. We sat at like 1,000.4 listeners for a year or 2 years. All of a sudden, last month, it doubled, and I wasn't sure why. But I'll take it, and we get a lot more listeners over on the radio station. But I bellyache because I take it personally. Maybe that's one of the things, maybe I can be a little offended. You didn't offend me, Niall, at all. To get that out of your, perish that thought altogether. I wasn't really offended. I was a little bent. It's as that when you put effort into something, it would be like taking the time it took for me to write a book. When I wrote the book on the Nephilim, that's been my best book ever. And it has been, it still has legs 12 years later. So much so they want me to write an update to it, just to update a couple things so they can re-release it. And that's the only one that's still making me good royalties is Nephilim because of the topic. But it would be like reading through the hundreds of comments over on Amazon and seeing people say, "What a lousy book." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, well I don't need you reading it, dumbass." That's my reaction. It's like, lousy book. Did you read it? Are you just not into this kind of book? So do I take that personally? A little bit. There's a confession on my own show, which is what I do. I've said this show is all about me, the things I like, the things I hate, the things I talk about, the things that anger me, the things that make me happy, my family life, raising kids, relationships, history, weird history, the paranormal, all that stuff. These are the things that get my juices going. And so I talk about them. But, and it's like that writing of a book. If somebody says, this book sucked, I wouldn't waste my money. One guy said it's not worth the cost of the paper it was printed on. And I said, well, that's pretty expensive to print on those papers. I said, so it's probably at least worth that much. I said, but you know what? He said, somebody said, I got into it through 1.5 chapters and I put it down. I couldn't stand it. What a mess this book was. And I said, you know what? I said, you didn't read the book. So your opinion is only, out of 20 chapters, you read 1.2 chapters. What percentage point is that? If you read 1.2 chapters or 1.5 chapters out of 20, what percentage point of the book is that? I don't know how to do that kind of math. 10% of the book would be if you read 2 chapters. So he read maybe 7% of the book and rendered an opinion that it's a 1, not worth your time. So that didn't really offend me because that was a stupid review. And there were some meaningful, deep reviews that were very thought-provoking, that some were very good and some were very bad. So that's the kind of thing with radio. When you say, wow, I just put a hell of a lot of effort into doing that show, and somebody went, not my topic. I think I'll go listen to this guy over here talk about Satan, or whatever. So, some of the questions I get are just wildly ridiculous, not ridiculous questions, just topics I don't really talk about. And when I try to talk about some of them, I don't do very well because you got to research. I research my research is fairly narrow, and I branch off into different things every now and then, but I don't always hit everything. Let's see. What's Field Guy say? You're going to talk about your book. He put a mistype on there. Haha, yeah, exactly. So, what, the reviewer, or you're saying tonight? I don't know. I didn't notice yet. So I didn't read his post very tightly. I just knew I had to go on. So, and I got to get over there myself at 10 o'clock tonight to talk about that book. And so it'll be an interesting topic if you're still around. And instead of coming to the captain's cabin, come on over and listen to Ghostbox Radio at that link that I put in. Here, I'll put it in here one more time. There it is. If you want to come over and hear this at 10 o'clock tonight, Greg Buchan. And I hate to say it, Greg, if you're listening to this show, I don't even know if I've heard your show before or if I've been on it in the past. That's really bad to say. When I wrote Nephilim, we did like 200 interviews in that first 4 months after, and you'd think that sounds impossible. It felt impossible at the time. It was crazy. So I see the professor is here. Need another boys measuring bottle show. That's for sure. Those are the shows, I think, Professor Bauer, that people like to see. For some reason, they like to see us drunk and disorderly. Your book on the Nephilim was of its time, 2011. Yep, an excellent book, but needs some updating. I own the book, but in retrospect need something more. Exactly. And Niall, that's my publisher wants me to write some updates in that book and maybe a new chapter. And then they'll re-release it as a second edition of that book. No filibusters tonight, Professor. Yeah. Well, there's no after show tonight, so he won't have the opportunity. Sorry to say, Professor Bauer, and it's good to see you in here, by the way, Professor, because I haven't seen you for a while. And so, having said all of that, perhaps me being a little personally triggered by you know what triggers me? It's maybe Professor Bauer can attest to this, or Field Guy, or anybody that's done radio or works on things or writes books. What was this? Danica and Robert, I turned off your live show because you spent an hour twiddling buttons. It's only because you put effort into something and you think it's worthwhile. And it's the kind of stuff you've always talked about. And then suddenly nobody shows up because, I got better things to do than, I don't want to hear that topic. And you're like, well, fine. Go do something else then. Go watch an episode of The Rookies or something. I don't care. So, hey, Doctor Who. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. I don't know if I know who you are just by your moniker. So, Doctor Who, do I know you? If I do, well, hooty-dooty-doo. It wasn't for anyone. It was just a test, Niall. Oh, there you go. Yeah, that last show you did was really boring. That test show, it was called Test. I didn't see no test in it. All you were doing was pushing buttons. Sarah says it's difficult to find an audience to appreciate effort. Not always instant gratification. That's very true. And that's why I'm an emotive being. So that's why I tend to brush off a hell of a lot of insult and a hell of a lot of intended offense. Remember, what do I say? You can't offend me ever, because I would have to appropriate your intended offense in order to be offended. That's why, and that's a political speak on that one. So I look at our society and how offended everybody is. And the people are so offended that, I'm just going to nab a topic out of the air. You've got an Indian chief as the mascot for your football team. The Native Americans are offended by that. And usually it's not the Native Americans saying anything about that. It's usually somebody thinking that they can speak for the Native American. Well, I can speak for humanity and say that that's offensive. And they lead a movement for you to change your team name, your mascot name. And you go and you talk to a Native American, they go, I don't care what that honors the Native American chiefs. Things like that. But I can sometimes I let it get to me. There are times where I let my guard down and I say, well, you know what? If you don't like tonight's topic, so you're not going to tune in, not going to join in like you do every other night, then fuck off. That's the way I can get sometimes. I'm not saying that to anybody in particular, but I'm saying if you find somebody else more entertaining, go listen to them all the time. That it's like dating in a way. It's like dating. It's like I like you tonight, but you were going to take me somewhere. I don't want to go to that restaurant. I think I'll go with him tonight instead. And you're like, well, you know what? You can go with him next time too. How about that? So, anyway, there's all that is. Blah, blah, blah. Put up with me. And if you don't put up with me, I don't care. This is me. So, tonight's topic, now that we're a half an hour into the show, I was going to talk about David in Saul's service. David as a servant to King Saul, and how when we look at this in the text, it's a cover-up. Now somebody, I'm not just stumbling upon this, but by way of all the things we've been talking about tonight, some of this kind of a show not being everybody's cup of tea, because I'm talking about biblical topics like this. even though it's controversial to talk about biblical topics, I think it just could be that people think it's going to be a Bible lesson when it's not. Anyway, let's proceed here, and you'll see what I mean by this as we get into it. This, to me, is interesting history, because I've always said that I believe that the Bible has efficacious history. Well, sometimes I don't think it does. So the big question I was asking about tonight, David and Saul's service, is this revealing a biblical cover-up? Were the writers trying to express a cover-up to us? Because when we try to reconstruct the life of the historical David, which is what I was trying to do with this series, and it could be that this is only interesting to people who are interested in the Bible. Maybe there's not a lot of people out there that care that much. I don't care about that topic. So it's not their thing. And so they tune it out. I get that. That's okay. And but when we try to reconstruct the life of this historical figure out of the pages of the Bible, we're at a significant disadvantage. Everything we know about David pretty much comes exclusively from the Bible. Yet we've already seen that the biblical authors, by the stuff we've already talked about, that the biblical authors are not above inventing episodes for the sake of portraying David in a particularly positive light. So when we realize this about a biblical character, it makes us sit back and go, wait a minute. What if it's not true? What if the things I were taught about all of this is not the truth? And so the fundamental question that the historian has to ask is whether any material in the Bible at all can be judged to be historically accurate. Or, to put it another way, why shouldn't we assume that everything in the pages of the Bible is invention? Why should we even think that David himself wasn't an invention? Remember the title of this series, the whole thing is subtitled David, the True Life, the Real Life Story of an Invented Hero. The real life story of a guy who was made up. So what clues are there to suggest that David really existed? And even may have done some of the things that were described in the Bible. As it turns out, the first 2 chapters of the David story in 1 Samuel are rather unlike the rest of the narrative of his life. After those chapters, there's no more mythical battle scenes and only very few explicitly theological passages, which are easy enough to spot. And like the secret anointing in 1 Samuel 16, the majority of the story of David is an ostensibly chronological recounting of the significant events in David's life, with special concentration on his relationship with the others around him, with Saul, the king, with Jonathan, Saul's son, with the inhabitants of Judah, with the Philistines, the enemies, with Saul's descendants, with his own opponents, with his own children, all these conflicts. And in virtually every part of the text, however, the program is identical to that of the first 2 chapters, to demonstrate that David is righteous, that he's innocent of any wrongdoing, and that he's fit to be the king who inaugurates this glorious dynasty, despite the fact that he, born to a shepherd in Bethlehem, had no obvious right to the throne at all. He had no claim whatsoever, except the old prophet came by and, like some watery bint throwing a sword out of the water, anoints him king out of nowhere. So he had no right to the throne, other than the prophet of God anointed him to be the next king. And in this, the David narrative belongs to this well-established ancient literary genre called the apologetic, which I've mentioned many, many times. And I know, Matthew, I thought about you, as a matter of fact. I know that this is a point you like to bring up, the passing the love of women, A.K. Jonathan. David did not bypass the love of women. It just said he loved Jonathan as a man greater than a man loves his own brother. And he had a great love for him. There are one or two men in my life that I have a love for them that is greater than the love of a woman. It's not talking about sexual love there. It's talking about love of the heart is in the language. And there are some men that I love to that degree. And I am unashamed with it. Does that mean there's a homosexual tendency or a gay tendency in me? No. It means I am a loving person and that there are friends I have that I love. And some of them I elevate above the love of a woman. Now, I wouldn't elevate the love of a man, a friend of mine, above my woman. When I was married to my wife, Rainey, my love for her became elevated, higher above anybody else. But that does not mean that I don't have a love for men. And I know, Matthew, that you and I that we've talked about this before. Some people try to put sexual or homosexual or gay tendencies to David and Jonathan. I don't think it meant that at all. The context is not there. And David loved his women. That's for sure. When he was old and stricken in years and couldn't keep heat in his own bed, they didn't go get him a guy. They went and got him a young woman to get him heat, as it said in the old English. And so it was. I'm sure it was platonic. Is my love for a man that I love in my life that is one of my closest friends? Is it platonic? What's the definition of platonic? It was never sexual with me and the other man. It never was anything of that nature at all. It was a love that a man has for his friend. And a deep love that could not be overtaken by, if it had come down to it, there weren't many women that could make me not love my friend. And if they gave me that ultimatum, they'd be gone. It's like love for my children. I know this is a rabbit trail, but a silly example. I have twin daughters, as you all know. When they were growing up, what was the big Disney remake that came out with Lindsay Lohan? Her I think it was her first movie. Dennis Quaid, Lindsay Lohan, and I can't think of the woman. I think it was the woman Richardson. But the Parent Trap that came out. Yeah, there it is, Sarah. The Parent Trap. And my kids loved that movie, my twin daughters. I still like that movie. There's still parts of that movie that make me tear up. I love that movie. But there was the one scene, and this comes to mind every time I say I love my kids. I remember he had the hot blonde that was trying to use him for his money and all that, and they went on a camping trip, and she gave him an ultimatum. She said, it's either them, and she's pointing at the twin daughters. You got to make your choice. It's either them or me. And what does he say? He looks at his kids. He goes, well, that's easy. He says, them. And she storms off. She gets all pissed off. Natasha Richardson. There it is. She played the mom. Great movie. It was a well-done movie. It was good for my kids. My kids loved it because they were twins, and I loved it. And that was who I was at the time, too. I was a dad to twin daughters and a son, and there was nothing that could overtake that for me. I think this is the kind of love that's being talked about with David and Jonathan. There is no indicator that he was doing what other elements of Scripture said was improper. That's just one way to look at it. So, interesting topic. But, yeah, I do not see Jonathan and David as being anything but the best of friends. And Jonathan, you're right, Matthew. Jonathan was the actual heir to the throne. And he still loved David, knowing that David had been anointed in the place of his dad. But is that the true history of what happened? Or is that part of the apologetic? Even Saul's own kids elevated David above their own dad because the apologetic was supposed to set Saul in a bad light. That's what these apologetics do. So we're really fortunate to have an example of this genre, the apologetic, from centuries just before the Bible began to be written. In the 13th century BCE, a Hittite king named Hattusili promulgated an account of how he came to rule. And Hattusili was the younger brother of the reigning Hittite monarch, a position of significant power, but one that didn't lead to the throne. Hattusili's brother had a son, and so the kingship would by rights pass to Hattusili's nephew, thereby skipping Hattusili. Hattusili explains in this text that exists from that time period, he explains in the text how he had been in charge of the Hittite armies under the reign of his elder brother, and how he enjoyed success after success in battle, and with the divine assistance of his patron goddess. And evidently his nephew, upon gaining the throne, saw Hattusili's military victories and the favor that the goddess had bestowed on him, and he became envious or perhaps nervous. And so the new king took away many of the properties that Hattusili had previously been granted. And soon enough, according to Hattusili, he sought my destruction, said Hattusili. However, he claims to have shown great restraint by saying, this is a quote from that story, "Out of regard for the love of my brother, I did not react at all." That's in more modern English. And so when he did eventually take over the kingship by capturing his nephew in battle, he did so not just of his own accord, but with the blessing of the deity, who had already early foretold kingship for me, said Hattusili, and of the populace at large. All of Hatti supported me. And so what you've got in here in this tale is a man who had no right to the kingship, who was a great military leader, aided by divine providence, whose successes aroused the envy of the king, who was unjustifiably pursued by the king, who proclaims his innocence, who is beloved by his deity and by the people of his land, and who, despite his station, becomes king. And to anyone who knows the story of David, this should sound very, very familiar. So what Hattusili says for himself is almost exactly what the biblical authors say on David's behalf. So this Hittite text has been called the Apology of Hattusili. And many scholars have seen fit to describe the narrative of David's life as the Apology of David. Because the similarity of details aside, it serves the same literary purpose: to demonstrate the greatness of the protagonist and even his God-given right to the throne, despite what we would expect to happen in the normal course of events. And when we recognize that the David story is written as an apology, and in context, an apology of its historical times, such as the story of Hattusili, when we recognize this, even though it remains a literary creation rather than what we might consider an historical one, new avenues of historical inquiry open up for us. And it's in the nature of an apology that it must apologize for something. That is, an apology is always written as a response, either to custom or to tradition, or most often to a counter-narrative that challenges the text's version of things. And if we understand the apology as the ancient version of political spin doctoring, this notion is going to be obvious. In today's media-driven world, spin is always is always and only produced as a means of explaining something differently from what one might think or from what others have said. And this has significant ramifications for historical reconstruction. For with both spin and apology, there's no need to explain something that never happened. The point of an apology is that something did, in fact, actually happen, and that something requires explanation. The story of David is a real story. The apology is putting spin on his real story. The real story of an invented hero. That's what apology does. So understanding the David story as an apology, therefore, takes us to make three major steps. First, and broadly, we can reject the notion that David never existed. You don't write apologetics about people who never lived. There's no point. So that's the first thing. There would be no need to apologize for a fictional character. Now, if David were invented, we're safe in assuming that many of the stories that we read about him would never have been told. We would have an entire narrative that looked like the first 2 chapters of his life in the book of Samuel. And if the Bible apologizes for David, then he must have existed. And this literary conclusion is borne out in dramatic fashion by the recent discovery of a late 9th century BCE inscription in Aramaic that refers to Judah as the house of David. And they have since found coins in small towns, ruins around Israel, little tells, little villages that had coins from the administrative offices of King David, which is very interesting. That's important archaeological finds. And so it's one thing to surmise that ancient Israel invented its glorious founder, King David, but it's quite another thing to think that a foreign people would also invent David, because he's found in foreign annals. So second, recognizing the text as an apology allows us to date it to a period roughly contemporary with the times it describes. And by the way, this is why this stuff is important. Take the Bible aspect out of it. We're talking archaeology, history, anthropology here. An apology needs to explain events that its audience knows happened. And an audience centuries removed would have no way of accessing the real facts. This is why the stories of David and Samuel are apologetic, whereas those in the books of Chronicles, written some 6 centuries later, are not apologetic. Chronicles can tell the story however it wants. So it leaves out everything that's potentially embarrassing for David. But Samuel doesn't have that freedom. It must therefore be from a period relatively close to David's own time, because there are bad things about David that needed to be written out or explained, because to have written them out completely would have left the people who knew the stories, lived through them, or, hey, he was alive when my dad was around. That's not what happened. They have to write the apologetic. And third, on the methodological front, once we know that we're reading an apology, we know what to look for and how to proceed with the rest of the story. And the historian's task when reading an apology is to identify those features of the text that belong to the level of the apology, that cast David in a flattering light, that justify his actions, frequently in unlikely ways, and that denigrate his opponents. When all those things are stripped away, we may see what it is being apologized for and what it is that David may have done or was thought to have done. That, to me, is why it's important to look at this stuff. But it's only important if it's of interest to you. And the handful of you out there interested in this topic. Now, we've got to end the radio show here in about a minute. And when we do so, you can come over. I'll paste it one more time. You can listen to this link or catch the show over here. It's Ghost Box Radio with Greg Buchan. There is no Captain's Cabin tonight, no after show, folks. This is it when we sign off with radio. And then I go over to Greg Buchan's show, and we do a show over there. You can wish me luck. I got to remember what I wrote about the reptilians because I rarely go back and reread that. So it'll be a fun show. A good bit of fun remembering what I said about things. Let me take a quick drink. So there it is. I'm sorry, but I make no apologies about the beginning of the show where I ranted a bit about certain things that bug me. But hey, that's me. If you like my show, take me. Take me for good or for bad. That's who I am. It's what I do. And if you guys want specific topics, be sure to comment on the show below. There it is, says Sarah. Yeah, I take suggestions, guys. If you like this show and it's worth your time, and you want to be here, let's talk about this stuff and do the kind of stuff you want to see in here. So that's all I got to say about that. So we're getting ready to blast off. I want to thank you all for being here. Again, no Captain's Cabin tonight, so don't stick around. There's nothing to listen to after this. And to the radio audience, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. You can come over and watch the rebroadcast of this and see the chat room. And so until next time, Friday night, I want you all to live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid Radio Program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.